So, last 40 minutes with me, a little bit. Two things. First one, I was talking with some of you, and I got requests for systems that I've been working on, and some of you are interested. So my goal is tomorrow to tell you a little bit about molecular dynamics. That is the main tool that I used. And then Wednesday, I was planning some applications. So the idea was to show you how I use it and what kind of question we've been addressing. So if you're interested in a specific question, you just let me know. And so for Wednesday, I can shape a little bit the presentation according to your interest. So I had a couple of people asking about inorganics. So if, for example, the value of this is that I think, again, you want to expand a little bit to what you're doing in terms of combustion eventually. Understanding that the tools you're learning are amazing, but you can move also to other things related to combustion, like, for example, nanomaterials. So people use flames to produce nanoparticles that they're interested in, okay? And so I have done some work on the alumina in a flame. So maybe I can show you that Wednesday. So someone else was asking about the health effect. So what happened to those nanoparticles? So the only point I want to mention is that if you're interested in a question and there is something that you would like to see Wednesday, just let me know, okay? So I'll build the presentation with you. So whatever you like or you are interested in. The other thing I want to mention is I was talking with one of you, and Carson, that I lost him. Where is Carson? Carson. Okay, here. So I like that, first of all, you get to know more people during the break, and also can tell you a little bit about the research because it's related to what I was mentioning before. And so I like that feedback. So maybe, okay, do you need the microphone for a second? So I asked him to basically tell you a little bit what he's doing, what problems he's having, and how somehow related to what I just mentioned.
So this is Carson from Toronto, Mary Thompson's group. Oh, sorry. So it's good? It's good? Okay. So our group did a lot of soot measurements using different techniques. And we did a lot of aromatic fields. And we realized that the modeling is very difficult. So even with the most advanced state-of-art soot modeling models and the pH chemistry mechanisms, we still cannot accurately predict the soot formations. So we can match the superfluid fractions, but we don't match the diameters. We match the diameters, and we cannot match with the lumber density. So it's very difficult. Yep. So there's a room for the research, a lot of room. Thank you.
What system are those?
Huh?
What systems are you looking at? Flames? What flames?
Flames are called flow diffusion flame.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So the point is basically that even right now, if you're looking for open questions, chemistry of the pHs, for example, the gas phase is a big deal. They are sampling, like right now, a co-flow flame, so it's a little bit more complex than simple premix flames. But even so, the concentration of the species is off. And of course, what is the chemistry of gas phase species when they grow into aromatics is an open question for sure. And the other one is how do they change into nanoparticles? Okay, so let's go back to this for a second. And so I want to use the last time that we have together to tell you something about the mechanism and why they don't reproduce what we see experimentally. So go back to this again. I'm talking about this kind of pHs and the transition into nanoparticle of this size. One thing I have not mentioned before is that the reason why I show you this graph is because there is a time scale issue. So tomorrow I'll start from this comment here. So while you can have, for example, the formation in the species look at the time scale of 1 millisecond, then this, the time scale changes, and you need to take into account things that are happening at this scale, gas phase, but also the particle dynamics that is a different time scale. So it's complex, basically. So in terms of Precursors, we said we talk about HACA, that is one of the main pathways. And again, I want to mention that sometimes you see HACA as acetylene, sometimes as a carbon. It depends a little bit on maybe the paper that you are referencing to. But carbon is a little bit more general. Acetylene is the most abundant. So somehow, even if you say carbon, what it means is acetylene because it's the highest probability to be present in the system. So we're just talking about the pHs here, and the pHs, you see, they form 6-member rings, and sometimes also ace naphthalene, that is a 5-member rings. Okay, so I'm skipping this. But I want to say that Frank, Lack, and Wang, they look at this HACA in all the details. They look at the thermodynamics, at the kinetics, and develop a mechanism for that. So there were other development. So now people also has what they call ABF model is another one. And again, ABF model and mechanism. And so basically is really sensitive with a lot of chemistry going on. This is a list of something that is available right now. And again, different species. So you can have phenol, that is the 6-member rings with a radical that is reacting. You can have cyclopentadienyl, so C5H5. They are all pathways, all mechanisms that you find in the current kinetic description of the systems. So people are looking at reaction pathway. The problem is that you don't match. Why you don't match? You have a mechanism that has a list of all the reactions that can happen. So you know that if I start from this fuel, I'm going to form acetylene, then propargyl, all the species in the gas phase. So you have a distribution of pathways. Why you don't match? You don't match for 2 main reasons. You don't match because the pathways, maybe the rate, so how fast the reaction happened, it's wrong, okay? So you have the pathway, but you don't have the right velocity. You get the velocity usually with this type of simulations. So those are, again, potential energy analysis in which you have a pathway, so you have a mechanism. This one I was studying like C5H5 reacting with a stable cyclopentadiene compound. And so we look at different pathways, hypotheses. Those are the species that are formed. And then you do what they call quantum chemistry to look at the energetics. So you say, this is my initial reactant. If I want to go here, for example, how much energy do I need to move my next step? Okay? And then you compare somehow with KBT, so the temperature that you have, and try to understand if this jump is possible. That's what you do with the quantum chemistry somehow. And so you come up with ideas and pathways. One of the limitations is that you need to know what's going on. So you need to know that from here, I'm going to this point. Okay? The system is not evolving by himself. You need to tell it, this is my reactant, this is my product, and then you compute the energetics. Okay? So you need to have some knowledge of the compound. But this is basically telling you, you know, the rate of this compound. And so other pathways that have been studied is this. So here I have, what if I have a pH that look like that? How can I close my ring in the middle? Okay? It's not a simple step. It's not an elementary step, they call, but there is a combination of steps that leads you to that. And again, you need to think about what are the possibilities. And so here I'm showing again, for example, from this compound, I have 3 different exits, and they all are somehow bringing me to this point here. So this is a reaction that can happen. If you have this kind of compounds in combustion, then you can close to 5-member rings. And as you can see, you start having some kind of strain in the molecule. A little bit of curvature is forming. But the other thing that is interesting here is that if you have something like this, you can have also a reaction in which now I'm closing with the 5-member rings on the edge. And as you can imagine, the different pathways are, there's a huge number of them. You know, it's very difficult to think about. As a human, it's very difficult to think about this. And so Other pathways are something that looks like this. Again, I'm just showing you this example as an idea, because you have to think about the chemistry that you want to do. I don't want you to learn any of this, remember, but the idea is that just to see. So if I have these two molecules, they can attach in this way, they can attach in this other way, or they can touch here. And you can see the pathways are different. Just because I attach in different position, then I'm leading to different compounds byproduct. So this is one of the idea. Before I go, the other, and so there is much more that has been published in the literature, especially recently, about other people that suggest other pathways. And again, here I listed, in case you're interested, there is a reference if you want to go back and if this is what your topic is. But otherwise, the only point of this long list is to tell you that people come up with different ideas of chemistry. Because the question again is, why you don't match? So there are, again, two answers to that. One is that the rate is not clear, right? So you did an accurate calculation of the energetics. But the other problem is that your mechanism, your pathways is not complete, because there are too many options, and you cannot think of all of them at the same time. Okay? So this is, again, just the list, and I don't need you to go through that, but again, it is just to show the complexity. This is something else that is called, I don't know, CAN, and similarly, you have a carbon addition here, is a nitrogen migration, and you can grow different structures. So people are using different things. And this one, I don't know what's happening with the size resolution, so sorry about that. But this is another example in which people do energetics, and they're trying to guess some of the pathway that happen from, for example, naphthalene all the way up. As also Carson was mentioning, we still are not able to get any gas phase modeling that is correct on this. Okay? It's very rare that you do that. Why? Because it's very complex. It's more complex than what we have now. So this is definitely an open question, and there is a lot of room for experimental study in this area. What are the main evidence? The main evidence is that there is not only 6-member formation. I show you HACA. I show you some pathway, they have only 6-member rings, and some of the 5-member rings too. But our description is not complete. Experiments, they see aliphatic chain. So they see, for example, a 6-member rings with kind of tails, if you want. They see 5-member rings inside the structures, but also outside. They see some oxygen content, and they see curvature. And none of the things that I show you up to this point is able to encompass all those 4 features. So room for experiment, room for computational interest in this thing. Experiment, just to give you an example. So hydrogen-carbon ratio. This was a low-pressure flames, and molecular beam high resolution mass spectrometry was the technique in a flame. What they measured was the species that they collect. And what I'm showing you here is the number of carbon and the number of hydrogen. The line is the stabilomers. Remember, I just told you that one of the most abundant pHs that people use also in models is the dose. Those are the stabilomers. Those are 6-member rings pericondensed. And so if you plot them in this kind of graph, you end up with a line and a line. The points are the experiment. The experiment is telling you, you know what, I'm not only stabilomers. I am different. I have different features. I can be above or I can be below, depending if, for example, I have a chain or if I have a 5-member rings in the system. So there is a variety of species that current models based only on stabilomers are not catching, basically, are not able to add. Aliphatic chain, sorry again, I don't know why it's messed. This is our experimental data. And what they saw is basically the functionalized groups, the ratio with aromatics, basically, in function of the flame temperature. This is again the reference if you want on the left. But what they saw basically is that the ratio is changing according to the different flames that you can have. Okay. Another thing is aliphatic carbon. This is AFM, and what they saw, this is a very recent paper by an Italian group, basically. Sorry for the text here. But what they saw is basically using AFM, they were able to image some of the pHs. And what this is that something that they have tails on the side here. So there is a core that is very condensed, but there is also tails. And there is also some kind of bridges here in which you have, maybe a CH here, and eventually you can have also an oxygen. So pH chemistry is complex. It's not simple as I show you in the model. This is the presence of 5-member rings. This is more experimental data, and they show that you can have different 5, for example, pentagon rings. I think I have all of this in the slide. If there is a change, I will upload the final slides at the end, so you can, augment whatever you have with the more slides. But this is also showing you that AFM, again, very recent papers, they saw the presence of 5-member rings and other different functionality that are currently not very represented. This is experimental data again, so this is a flame, a co-flow diffusion flame, Carson, where is Carson? And what they saw is basically that there is an oxygen content in the species. And so the atomic ratio in the species where sample collected in these flames, what they see is the presence of oxygen. Now, nothing of the pH chemistry I show you has oxygen inside, for example. Okay, so this is all a new world of compounds that needs to be accounted in the mechanisms that we are developing. And one point I want to make is that it's very important always for people who do modeling to interact with experimental people. You cannot model in the vacuum because otherwise you model whatever you want. You need something that grounds you to the, that keep your feet on the ground, basically. And so interaction with experimental people is very, very important. So here I'm showing you that experimental data show an oxygen-carbon ratio present in the species as well. One of the last one maybe I have is another experimental, this is from us actually, so I should know what it is. And there was a premixed flames that there was an ethylene, and what we saw is basically oxygen functionality in the species. What you see here is the type of bond, but here on the right, it is the first way more interesting, I think, is as a function of the distance from the burner. So it was a premixed flame, so you have a burner, you have a flame, and premixed flames are very interesting because you can decouple fluid dynamics from the chemistry. So we were really looking at the chemistry here, and what you see is that as a function of the distance, you have the trend of the functionality changes. So depending on the COO or COC or COH, so if you have a furane, if you have an ether, an ester, whatever, you have a different trend. So initially you form more of this, and then they go down and you start to see the formation of the other species. So this was a very interesting paper that showed also the presence of oxygen, but more importantly also the time of evolution, so how the different compounds turn into each other. I have more of the oxygen, but I'm not going to show you. It's always the same. I want to show you curvature. That was another part of the story. So aliphatic, 5-member rings, oxygen content, and curvature. I think those are all, I would say, 4 major features that needs to be taken into account at this point. And so this is some of the structures that were collected. This is also a recent paper. It was high-resolution transmission electron microscopy, and have shown that there's a fraction of curved polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons in Soot. Okay, so again, more complexity in the system. So here I kind of build my story for tomorrow. There is complexity, there is modeling that are difficult. So the pH formation is a complex to study, and current approach are either Chemkin type, in which you have a deterministic model. So what that means is that basically you need to know what's happening for some specific rules, and then stochastic and molecular dynamics. And those are the 2 that I want to talk about tomorrow to show how we can implement this story. The example for the deterministic model is something that I'm sure you guys, at least some of you, are familiar with. I don't want you to, this is not an eye test. This is just to show you what you do, basically. When you do a ChemKin type simulation, you need to spell out the species. So you need to know a priori, before doing anything, what are the species. You need to know also a mechanism that I was talking about. A mechanism is something in which there is a pathway. Say this species becomes this species, and this is about rate. How fast? The rate usually is expressed as Arrhenius, and so you have three parameters. You have the pre-exponential factors, you have the n for the temperature, and you have activation energy. Okay, so that's it. But the point is that before you do anything, you need to know the species, you need to know mechanism, pathway, and reaction rate. And even if you do that, this is the type of result in the best possible scenario that we can get. And maybe it speaks to what Carson was mentioning before. So mole fraction, this is just an example that I took. That it cannot be. So this is the height above the burner. Mole fraction profile in a benzene flame as a function of the height of the burner. So if we look at some of the mechanisms in the literature, you see a discrepancy between experiments, the dots, and the lines. And be careful, this is a log scale. So what that means is that the discrepancy in the log scale is huge. Okay, it's not that. So some match well, some they don't match well. And then if you change the condition with the same mechanism, you get a totally different answer. So talking about being predictive and trying to be able to expand your chemistry to different scenarios is an important goal here. So again, some of the simulation works well, others are completely off. And if you apply the same mechanism to different things, you have different results. They don't do. This is another example. Again, this is a log scale. And now look at the concentration of the pHs. So not benzene, but when you try to grow, the discrepancy. And so log scale, this is experiments. This is some modeling. Some are not too bad, considering always the log scale. Some are like a disaster or something. So one more. This is another paper in which, again, you can now, especially when you start talking about those bigger pHs, things are not working very well at this point. So you guys are looking for a future. If you're interested in chemistry when in experiment, this system is really appealing to a lot of people. Okay, so let me see what I have now. Then I'm running out of time, so I'm going to skip on last things. And I want to briefly introduce nanoparticles. I will start from this tomorrow, but I want to briefly mention. So I'm not talking anymore about gas phase chemistry, okay? Now I want to jump to nanoparticles. So something that is bigger and very difficult to sample. So I had the question during the break. The reason why this is a very challenging regime is because things happen very fast. Temperature is very high. You have a lot of radicals, and things are going nuts. So they like to react. You don't have time to sample this region. So people sample before, as I just showed you in the gas phase chemistry. You can maybe sample pyrene concentration. You can sample some nanoparticles with the particle size distribution. What happened in between, how this pyrene becomes 2 nanometers, it's still a mystery here. And so on the line of telling story, I think this could be interesting. So there is some reviews in the combustion about nanoparticles. Over the years, there are a lot of people who are working on this. I think one of the first book I read, maybe when I started my PhD in this field, was this roundtable discussion, 1983. So that tells you how old I am. But those people are, and they are still around. I went to my conference 3 days ago. This guy was still there, Bokorn. Dan is still there. So it's nice, as I was mentioning, to read the paper and then also meet the people. So this is an historical plot. I think you guys should know this. So this was, Wagner was the Soot round table. That is a Göttingen in 1987. And what they were talking about is that this is the distribution of the molecular weights and the hydrogen also for different species that they were able to measure at that time. So there were, like, of course, small fuels. So I was talking like a benzene, polyenes here, and then there was a soot. Okay, there was this thing. things have changed. Things have changed with the new technique. And so now there is a whole realm of things that you don't see. So here is supposed to be like, I think you have in the slides maybe. This is supposed to be like a shady, like a gray area. And it's telling you that these are not separate, but nanoparticles actually fill the gap in this and link what happened here in the pHs with what happened next in the soot. So how were nanoparticles discovered, first of all? This is a particle size distribution that you see here. So this is the smaller nanoparticle, and then again, when you grow in size, you form the second hump here. So the first time that they were observed was in 1973, and there was a molecular beam sampling. They found a particle of around 2 nanometers. D'Alessio did a lot of work with optical technique, and so that was the best kind of a non-intrusive spectroscopy technique, and to identify those nanoparticles basically in the system. Additional technique, just to give you an idea, because we started from the experiment, was a differential immobility analyzer. A lot of work has been done that. So basically you sample in a flame and then you collect the material that is separated according to the mass of the system also. And so no matter what, there was also other think of flame sampling, photoionization, mass spectrometry. And nevertheless, these experiments contain only limited chemical information. So some of the things that we learned, let me see here for a second. And I'll stop at this, the experiment, and then tomorrow we'll start from the modeling. So first of all, they learned about, during some laser-induced fluorescence, they understood that those kind of nanoparticles had some aromatic island, but they were linked by aliphatic things. And so through fluorescence and absorption, what they could find is basically that there were like this island connected with aliphatic bonds here in the system. So there was some information about the chemistry, but not much. They measure particle size distribution, and so what they notice is the presence of this first hump, basically. So particle diameter and the distribution here. And so the nucleation of the kinetics, since they thought is a dimerization. So what happens is that you have a pyrene, you have a gas phase, then they get together and they start growing, basically. So being a second order, the nucleation, so meaning with the two species getting together, you get to the bimodality here, basically. The first order nucleation gives instead particles that are just unimodal. And so this is basically showing you the formation of the first nanoparticle, and then the second, that is bimodal, basically. And so this tells you something about the kinetics. So you have a second order, two things getting together. So what we want to understand, what are those two things and how they grow, for example. The last slide that I want to show you is this. So an additional information for the experiment. And so you have the mass spectrum of fragments from photoionization of soot. And what you see, this is the work put in 2007. This was an acetylene oxygen flame. What you see is that the peaks here, the intensity of these peaks, can be assigned to some kind of stacking of pHs. So at this point, the question is, once you have this pyrene, for example, this pH, how do they grow? How do they become bigger? So experiment tells you that maybe there is a chemistry with a very loose connection. There are aliphatic, there are aromatic islands connected with an aliphatic bond. There is evidence that there is a stacking also in this case. And so the question is, and there is particle size distribution that is bimodal, so there are two things getting together. So the question is, now we want to model this. What can we do? Okay? And so I'm going to stop here, and we'll start tomorrow from this particle modeling. And I want to show you the molecular dynamics. Last things before I go, again, I just want to remember, so we have 5 minutes, but if you want to, if there's something you're interested in, just let me know, again. So I'll be happy to change the presentation for Wednesday to whatever you need. Okay? Thank you for the patience to stay with me today.